Hi everyone, I'm Miss Mary Beth. I'm the Youth Services Librarian at Ingalls Memorial Library in Minch, and I'm here today for Armchair Adventures. And that's our series where every day I read a little bit of a book to you, and eventually we finish a whole book. And the book we're reading right now that we're almost done with is The Jungle Book. And this was written by Rudyard Kipling. And Rudyard Kipling grew up in India, and he moved to England and then back to India, and then eventually he wrote this while he was living in Vermont. And this was published as short stories in a magazine in 1893 and 1894. And so each of the chapters are a little bit different. They're not related. It's not a continuous story. 3 of them are about Mowgli, the boy who grew up in the jungle, but most of them aren't. And today, the last chapter is called Servants of the Queen. And that's what we're starting today. And this one is all about, a lot of his stories are fables, which means animals talk and they teach us lessons. They are given human characteristics. So this is a fable with all the animals talking to each other about their role, serving the queen, I guess. But let's see. And it starts with a poem. You can work it out by fractions or by simple rule of 3, but the way of Tweedledum is not the way of Tweedledee. You can twist it, you can turn it, you can plait it till you drop. But the way of Pilly Winky's not the way of Winky Pop. I wonder what that means. Is it related to our story? Let's find out. And it starts off with a picture of all these camels. I guess they're one of the characters. Let's see. It had been raining heavily for 1 whole month. Raining on a camp of 30,000 men and thousands of camels, elephants, horses, bullocks, and mules all gathered together at a place called Rawalpindi, to be reviewed by the Viceroy of India. He was receiving a visit from the Emir of Afghanistan, a wild king of a very wild country. The Emir had brought with him for a bodyguard 800 men and horses who had never seen a camp or a locomotive before in their lives. Savage men and savage horses from somewhere on the back of Central Asia. Every night, a mob of these horses would be sure to break their heel ropes and stampede up and down the camp through the mud in the dark, or the camels would break loose and run about and fall over the ropes of the tents. And you can imagine how pleasant that was for men trying to sleep. My tent lay far away from the camel lines, and I thought I was safe. But one night a man popped his head in and shouted, "Get out, quick! They're coming! My tent's gone!" I knew who they were, so I put on my boots and waterproof and scuttled out into the slush. Little Vixen, my fox terrier, went out through the other side, and then there was a roaring and a grunting and a bubbling, and I saw the tent cave in as the pole snapped and began to dance about like a mad ghost. A camel had blundered into it, and wet and angry as I was, I could not help laughing. Then I ran on because I did not know how many camels might have got loose, and before long I was out of sight of the camp, plowing my way through the mud. At last I fell over the tail end of a gun, and by that I knew I was somewhere near the artillery lines where the cannon were stacked at night. And I did not want to plotter about any more in the drizzle and the dark, so I put my waterproof raincoat over the muzzle of one gun, and I made a sort of wigwam with 2 or 3 rammers that I found, and I lay along the trail of another gun, wondering where Vixen might have got to, and where I might be. Just as I was getting ready to go to sleep, I heard a jingle of a harness and a grunt, and a mule passed me shaking his wet ears. He belonged to a screw-gun battery, for I could hear the rattle of the straps and the rings and chains and things on his saddle pad. The screw guns are tiny little cannon made in 2 pieces that are screwed together when the time comes to use them. They are taken up mountains, anywhere that a mule can find a road, and they are very useful for fighting in rocky country. Behind the mule there was a camel, with his big soft feet squelching and slipping in the mud, and his neck bobbing to and fro like a strayed hen's. Luckily, I knew enough of beast language. Not wildly beast language, but camp beast language, of course, from the natives to know what he was saying. He must have been the one that flopped into my tent, for he called to the mule, "What shall I do? Where shall I go?" I fought with the white thing that waved, and it took a stick and it hit me on the neck. That was my broken tent pole, I thought to myself. "Shall we run on?" "Oh, it was you," said the mule. "You and your friends that have been disturbing the camp? All right, you'll be beaten for this in the morning, but I may as well give you something on account now." I heard the harness jingle as the mule backed and caught the camel in 2 kicks in the ribs that rang like a drum. Another time he said, You'll know better than to run through a mule battery at night, shouting, 'Thieves and fire!' Sit down and keep your silly neck quiet." The camel doubled up camel fashion, like a 2-foot rule, and sat down whimpering. There was a regular beat of hoofs in the darkness, and a big troop horse cantered up as steadily as though he were on parade. He jumped a gun tail, and he landed close to the mule. "It's disgraceful," the mule horse said. The troop horse said. "Those camels have racketed through our lines again, the 3rd time this week. How's a horse to keep his condition if he isn't allowed to sleep?" "Who's here?" he asked. "I'm the breech-piece mule of a No. 2 gun of the 1st Screw Battery," said the mule. "And the other one is one of your friends. He waked me up too. Who are you?" "I'm No. 15 E Troop, 9th Lancers. Dick Cunliffe's horse. Stand over a little there," he said. "Oh, beg your pardon," said the mule. "It's too dark to see much. Aren't these camels too sickening for anything? I walked out of my lines to get a little peace and quiet here." "My lords," said the camel humbly, "we dreamed bad dreams in the night, and we were very much afraid. I'm only a baggage camel of the 39th Native Infantry, and I'm not as brave as you are, my lords." "Then why didn't you stay and carry baggage for the 39th Native Infantry instead of running all around the camp?" asked the mule. "They were such very bad dreams," said the camel. "I am sorry. Listen, what is that? Shall we run on again?" "Sit down," said the mule, "or you'll snap your long stick legs between the guns." He cocked one ear and he listened. "Ugh, it's bullocks," he said. "Gun bullocks. On my word, you and your friends have wasted the camp very thoroughly. It takes a good deal of prodding to pull it up a bullock." I heard a chain dragging along the ground, and a yoke of the great, sulky, white bullocks that drag the heavy siege guns when the elephants won't go any nearer to the firing came soldiering along together. And almost stepping on the chain was another battery mule, calling wildly for "Billy! Billy!" "That's one of our recruits," said the old mule to the troop horse. "He's calling for me. Here, youngster, stop squealing." The dark never heard anybody yet. So here are our creatures. Those are the 2 bulls. Those 2 bullocks just came. And our troop horse. And our camel. And our mules. We're having quite an interesting conversation. Here, youngster, stop squealing. The gun bullocks lay down together and began chewing the cud, but the young mule huddled close to Billy. "Things," he said. "Fearful and horrible things, Billy. They came into our lines while we were asleep. Do you think they'll kill us?" "I am a very great mind to give you a No. 1 kicking," said Billy. "The idea of a 14-hand mule with your training disgracing the battery before this gentleman?" "Gently, gently," said the troop horse. "Remember, they are always like this to begin with. The first time I ever saw a man, it was in Australia when I was a 3-year-old. I ran for half a day, and if I'd seen a camel, I should be running still. Nearly all of our horses for the English cavalry are brought to India from Australia, and are broken in by the troopers themselves." "True enough," said Billy. "Stop shaking, youngster. The first time they put the full harness with all its chains on my back, I stood on my 4 legs and I kicked every bit of it. I hadn't learned the real science of kicking then, but the battery said they had never seen anything like it." "But this wasn't harness or anything that jingled," said the young mule. "You know I don't mind that now, Billy. It was things like trees, and they fell up and down the lines and bubbled. And my head rope broke, and I couldn't find my driver, and I couldn't find you, Billy, so I ran off with these gentlemen." The bulls. "Humph," said Billy. "As soon as I heard the camels were loose, I came away on my own account. Won a battery, a screw gun mule, calls gun bullocks gentlemen. He must be very badly shaken up." I guess he looks down on the bulls, don't you? "Who are you fellows on the ground there?" The gun bulls rolled their cuds and answered both together, "The 7th yoke of the 1st gun of the big gun battery. We were asleep when the camels came, but when we were trampled on, we got up and walked away. It is better to lie quiet in the mud than to be disturbed on good bedding. We told your friend here that there were nothing to be afraid of, but he knew so much that he thought otherwise." The bulls went on chewing. "That comes of being afraid," said Billy. "You get laughed at by gun bullocks. I hope you like it, young'un." The young mule's teeth snapped, and I heard him say something about not being afraid of any beefy old bullock in the world. But the bullocks only clicked their horns together, and they went on chewing. "Now, don't be angry after you've been afraid. That's the worst kind of cowardice," said the troop horse. "Anybody can be forgiven for being scared in the night, I think, but if they see things they don't understand." We've broken out of our pickets again and again, 450 of us, just because a new recruit got to telling tales of whip snakes at home in Australia, till we were scared to death by the loose end of our head ropes." "That's all very well in camp," said Billy. "I'm not above stampeding myself, for the fun of the thing, when I haven't been out for a day or two. But what are you on active service?" "That's quite another set of new shoes," said the troop horse. "Dick Cunliffe's on my back then, and he drives his knees into me, and all I have to do is watch where I'm putting my feet, and to keep my hind legs well under me, and be brittlewise." "What's brittlewise?" asked the young mule. "By the blue gums of the back blocks," snorted the troop horse. "Do you mean to say that you aren't taught to be brittlewise in your business? How can you do anything, unless you can spin around at once with the rein as pressed to your neck? It means life or death to your man, and of course that's life and death to you. Get round with your hind legs under you the instant you feel the rein on your neck. If you hadn't room to swing round, rear up a little and come round on your hind legs. That's being brittlewise." "We aren't taught that way," said Billy the mule. "We're taught to obey the man at our head. Step off when he says so, step in when he says so. I suppose it comes to the same thing. Now, with all this fine fancy business and rearing, which must be very bad for your hocks, what do you do?" "That depends," said the troop horse. "Generally, I have to go in among a lot of yelling, hairy men with knives, long, shiny knives, worse than the farrier's knives. And I have to take care that Dick's boot is just touching the next man's boot without crushing it. I can see Dick's lance to the right of my right eye, and I know that I'm safe. I shouldn't care to be the man or horse that stood up to Dick and me when we're in a hurry. He's a pretty brave horse when he goes into battle, huh?" "Don't the knives hurt?" asked the young mule. "Well, I got one cut across the chest once, but that wasn't Dick's fault." "A lot I should have cared whose fault it was, if it hurt," said the young mule. "You must," said the troop horse. "If you don't trust your man, you may as well run away at once. That's what some of our horses do, and I don't blame them. As I was saying, it wasn't Dick's fault. The man was lying on the ground, and I stretched myself not to tread on him, and he slashed up at me. Next time I have to go over a man lying down, I shall step on him." "Humph," said Billy. "That sounds very foolish. Knives are dirty things at any time. The proper thing to do is to climb a mountain with a well-balanced saddle, hang on by all 4 feet and your ears too, and creep and crawl and wriggle along till you come out hundreds of feet above anyone else on a ledge where there's just enough room for your hoofs. Then you stand still and you keep quiet. Never ask a man to hold your head, young'un. Keep quiet till the guns are being put together, and then you watch the little poppy shells drop down into the treetops ever so far below." "Don't you ever trip?" asked the troop horse. "They say that when a mule trips, you can split a hen's ear," said Billy. "Mules are very sure-footed, aren't they?" said Billy. "Now and again, perhaps, a badly packed saddle will upset a mule, but that's very seldom. I wish I could show you our business. It's beautiful. Why, it took me 3 years to find out what the men were driving at. The science of the thing is never to show up against the skyline, because if you do, you may get fired at. Remember that, young'un. Always keep hidden as much as possible, even if you have to go a mile out of your way. I lead the battery when it comes to that sort of climbing." "Fired at without the chance of running into the people who are firing?" said the troop horse, thinking hard. "I couldn't stand that. I should want to charge with Dick." "Oh no, you wouldn't. You know that as soon as the guns are in position, they'll do all the charging. That's scientific and neat. But knives, pah." The baggage camel had been bobbing his head to and fro for some time past, anxious to get a word in edgewise. Then I heard him say, as he cleared his throat nervously, I have fought a little, but not in that climbing way or that running way." "No, now you mention it," said Billy, "you don't look as though you were made for climbing or running much. Well, how was it, old hay bale?" "The proper way," said the camel. We all sat down. "Oh, my crupper and breastplate," said the troop horse under his breath. "Pfft, sat down?" "We sat down, 100 of us," the camel went on, "in a big square, and the men piled our kajwas, our packs and our saddles, outside the square, and they fired over our backs, and the men did, on all sides of the square." "What sort of men? Any men that came along?" asked the troop horse. "They teach us in riding school to lie down and let our masters fire across us, but Dick Cunliffe was the only man I'd trust to do that. It tickles my girths, and besides, I can't see with my head on the ground." "What does it matter who fires on you?" asked the camel. "There are plenty of men and plenty of other camels close by, and a great many clouds of smoke. I am not frightened then. I sit still and I wait." "And yet," said Billy, "you dream bad dreams and upset the camp at night. Well, well, before I lie down, not to speak of sitting down, let a man fire across me, my heels and his head would have something to say to each other. Do you ever hear anything so awful as that?" There was a long silence, and then one of the gun bullocks lifted his big head and said, "This is very foolish indeed. This is only one way of fighting." "Oh, go on," said Billy. "Please don't mind me. I suppose you fellows fight standing on your tails?" "Only one way," said the two together. They must have been twins. "This is that way. To put all 20 yoke of us to the big gun as soon as the two tails trumpets." Two tails is camp slang for the elephants. "What does two tails trumpet for?" said the young mule. "To show that he is not going any nearer to the smoke on the other side. Two tails is a great coward. Then we tug the big gun all together. Hee-yah! Hee-yah! We do not climb like cats or run like calves. We go across the level plain, 20 yoke of us, till we are unyoked again, and we graze while the big guns talk across the plain to some town with mud walls, and pieces of the wall fall out, and the dust goes up, as though many cattle were coming home." "Oh, and you choose that time for grazing?" asked the young mule. "That time or any other. Eating is always good." "We eat till we are yoked up again and tug the gun back to where the two tails is waiting for it. Sometimes there are big guns in the city that speak back, and some of us are killed, but then there are all the more grazing for those who are left. This is fate. It's nothing but fate. Nonetheless, Two Tails is a great coward. That is the proper way to fight. We are brothers from Hapur. Our father was a sacred bull of Shiva. We have spoken." "Well, I've certainly learned something tonight," said the troop horse. "Do you gentlemen of the screw gun battery feel inclined to eat when you're being fired at with big guns and Two Tails is behind you?" "About as much as we feel inclined to sit down and let men sprawl all over us, or run into people with knives. I never heard such stuff. A mountain ledge, a well-balanced load, a driver you can trust to let you pick your own way. I'm your mule. But the other thing? Pfft, no!" said Billy, with a stamp of his foot. "Of course," said the troop horse, "everyone is not made in the same way, and I can quite see that your family, on your father's side, would fail to understand a great many things." "Never you mind my family on my father's side," said Billy angrily, "for every mule hates to be reminded that his father was a donkey. My father was a southern gentleman, and he could pull down and bite and kick into rags every horse he came across. Remember that, you big old Brumby." Brumby means wild horse without any breeding. That's an insult, isn't it? Imagine the feelings of Ormond if a bus horse called him a cocktail, and you can imagine how the Australian horse felt. I saw the white of his eye glitter in the dark. "I'll have you know that I'm related on my mother's side to Carbine, winner of the Melbourne Cup. And where I come from, we aren't accustomed to being ridden or plowed shod by any parrot-mouthed, pig-headed mule in a popgun pea-shooter battery. Are you ready? On your hind legs!" wheeled Billy, and they both reared up facing each other, and I was expecting a furious fight, when a gurgly, rumbly voice called out of the darkness to the right, "Children, what are you fighting about? Be quiet." Both beasts dropped down with a snort of disgust, for neither horse nor mule can bear to listen to the elephant's voice. "It's Two Tails," said the troop horse. "I can't stand him. A tail at each end isn't fair." "My feelings exactly," said Billy, crowding into the troop horse for company. "We're very alike in some things." And that's where we'll stop for today. They were about to fight, right? But they didn't, so that's good. So when we continue, we'll find out what happens when Two Tails, the elephant, comes, and how they all get along. It's interesting to hear how they all fight in the battle. They all help the people in the army. But they all do it in very different ways. So it's interesting to listen to their conversation and find out their perspectives on it. So join me tomorrow when we finish up the chapter, Servants of the Queen, which finishes the book, The Jungle Book. Thanks for reading with me. Have a fun day.